seats. All right. Okay, we will recommence the committee meeting. So we're now on item 7. This is the Freshwater Policy Review, Round 1 Community and Engagement Feedback Update. And we've got Jackie Henry.
Madam Chair, we have a few people online and I will ask Jackie to introduce those folk when we get there. So I guess, Madam Chair, we wanted to bring this back to you for 2 reasons. One, so you're aware of what some of the key themes were that popped out of the feedback that we've just been through from late June through July, early August, in terms of the beginning of our freshwater policy review. It's also in reporting it back to the committee. Those documents can now be placed on the website, and they're public documents, which is really a principle of this council. When we go through the policy reviews, we try to put as much as possible out in the public as soon as we can. So, Madam Chair, Jackie, who is our engagement lead for the project, will take you through a few slides and then just respond to any questions. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora koutou katoa. I'll apologise in advance because I do, I might have a coughing fit, so apologies from me if that does happen. As Madam Chair and Tracy have said, my name is Jackie Henry. I'm a Senior Social Scientist within Tracy's Directorate and part of a team of social and economic scientists. And online we do have some support from Angus Gray, who's Senior Policy Advisor within the Water Policy team, and he's leading tangata whenua engagement. So he's the other part to that report. And we've got Helen Ritchie online, which some of you have met, and she facilitated all the community workshops and was involved in some of the planning to do with the stakeholder events. And I think we've got Naomi Crawford, who's team lead within the water policy section as well. But the focus of my presentation is on the high level results from the first round of community and stakeholder engagement that was held, as Tracy has said, for the freshwater policy review. So next slide, please. So firstly, just a little bit of background as to why we had this first round of engagement. It was through changes to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management in 2020, and that required all regional councils to review the freshwater aspects of their regional policy statement and regional plan, which has to be done by the 31st of December 2024, and that's not too long to go. So 2 rounds of community and stakeholder engagement were planned, and we've just finished that first round. And the second round is planned for a year's time in autumn 2023. Next slide, please. So in terms of the how or the process, in terms of the engagement approach, there were 9 face-to-face community workshops held throughout each of the freshwater management units. That's for Lake Taupo, West Coast, Waikato Waipa, Hauraki and Coromandel. There was also an online mapping tool and feedback form that was made available to everybody. And a webinar was held also. But the first community workshop was actually in Raglan in May. And there were a series of workshops in Taupo, Tokoroa, Te Kuiti, Kawhia, Hamilton, Tuakau, Paeroa and Whitianga. There was also another workshop, which was a mix of stakeholder and community, and that was in Matamata. So the last workshop was held in July, and the online mapping tool and feedback form collected similar information to what was held at the community workshops. and that closed on July the 31st. So there was definitely a tight timeframe to get a report together. The structure of the one-day workshops involved discussions and feedback spanning right across the planning process set out in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. And altogether, there were an estimated 150 people that attended those one-day water workshops. Some of you were there present and part of the conversations. There were also members of the community present, members of community groups, iwi and hapu, farmers and landowners, district and city council staff, district and regional councillors, stakeholders, agency staff, business owners, consent holders and rural professionals. And there were also just a few people, but 21 people completed the online feedback form, with 2 more sending their written feedback via the policy email. And those workshops were very structured in terms of following what's in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, in terms of workshopping around Te Mana o Te Wai, long-term visions, values and environmental outcomes, and various steps of the National Objectives Framework. Next slide, please. In terms of stakeholder engagement, there were a range of stakeholder sessions online via Microsoft Teams and also in person. That was through existing forums such as the Merrill Forum, the CE's Forum, Dairy Sector Group, the Dry Stock Sector Group, and many others. There was also an online feedback form. So for those sessions, whether they were structured or not, they all had a presentation, and for the structured sessions, there were questions that the people within the room or online would workshop. And those questions were around what are the priorities for their sector, what are some of the challenges, work that they're doing or actions they're doing to improve water quality, what else should be done, and how council should improve water quality through the planning documents. So altogether, there were an estimated 220 people that attended the range of stakeholder sessions, either online through Microsoft Teams or in person. And there were also 15 stakeholder responses to the online feedback form, as well as 3 others through the policy email provided as written feedback. I just wanted to go on to cover some of the high-level results now, which is, go to the next slide, please. So these are the topics, and because the information there's so much information, and this is also in the agenda, in the agenda report as part of an executive summary. So I'll just cover off some of the key themes per topic. So for example, at the community workshops, these were structured according to these topics. So Te Mana o Te Wai and long-term visions were workshopped in the beginning of those workshops, and then the following 5 points below that, these what we called bus stop or stations, where information was provided and a staff member would be on hand to guide discussions or answer questions. And the last point, challenges, strengths and how to progress. That was at the end of the day when there was more workshopping together in groups, and people within the room could talk about what are some of the challenges in light of all the freshwater management, or topics or issues or various areas that, for them personally, and what are some of the strengths within the community and how to progress or in light of the information that they had now then. So in terms of Te Mana o Te Wai, which is that workshopped topic in the beginning of those workshops, so there's no doubt that the community viewed the importance of Te Mana o Te Wai and how water is certainly essential. There was a view, though, that people were disconnected from water and needed to reconnect and not take it for granted. And one of the examples included the changing perspectives on swamps or the purpose of swamps, for example, the Whangamarino wetland, viewing it, seeing it as a swamp or drainage area, but to appreciate its value as habitat for bird life and as a filter to cleanse, to actually cleanse water. There's also recognition that if we get the waterways healthy, all other things will flow from it. And this means that the first thought should be for the water bodies we impact, and that people will need to accept constraints to protect the water and change behaviour as needed. The hierarchy of obligations and implementing Te Mana o Te Wai generated a number of comments, including finding a practical point of balance between what is degraded and pristine states, and that aspirations needed to be pursued with that balance in mind, tempered with an understanding of the cost to achieve them. It was also noted that participants from the Waikato and Waipa catchments could see links between Te Mana o Te Wai and the wording of the objectives of Te Ture Whai Mana, the vision and strategy. Participants from Waikato and Waipa could also see the links in terms of the restoration of the health and well-being of the water, placing a high value on water and the interrelatedness, with even some supporting the use of the current wording within Te Ture Whai Mana. With regard to long-term visions, each of the community one-day water workshops, community or people that were present developed their own visions, with some providing quite specific measures. For example, using aquatic indicators as measures, eradication of all pests as a measure, and while others noted the need for people to be part of that visioning process, including reference to engagement, education, and aspirations of fresh water to be affordable, sustainable, and realistic as part of their visions. For special sites and features, this was one of the bus stops. I think I went to maybe only 3 workshops, and I had the privilege of being one of the hosts at the special sites and features bus stop. And at that particular station, there was a map provided where people were able to identify which location was special to them and write a brief on a post-it note as to why it was special to them. And there was certainly a range of locations that were identified, mainly around recreation and/or activities. The sites included rivers, streams, lakes, aquifers, estuaries, a river mouth, waterfalls, and bush and scenic reserves. And some of the reasons these sites and features were considered special were, also for recreational use, but also because of the nature itself, a place of serenity, a place to relax, a source of mahinga kai, and just because it's home to many. Values and outcomes. I also had the privilege of being on this station too, at a couple of the workshops. So at this station, in terms of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Managed, there are 4 national compulsory values. So those are ecological health, human contact, threatened species, and mahinga kai. Pretty much all participants or all people at those workshops, and even online through the feedback form, valued all those values. And there were other values that the NPSFM needs to consider, and what was commonly important was the natural form and character. I won't list all what the other values are, but they were all important. Excuse me. Participants or people also had the opportunity to describe what aspects of those values were important to them, and on a map could identify locations within their catchment where those values applied. So the maps that were used were tailored to the workshop itself, whether it was in the same FMU or a location. The next station was attributes and targets, and more often than not, there would be a science staff member present who would have information relevant to that particular location or FMU. And there were a few questions asked at that station. So what are the general concerns in our community? People talked about the current state of their waterways, including, the concerns with levels of sediment, a general decline in water quality, the impact of plant, animal and fish pests or invasive species, the nutrient effects on human health and ecosystems, cyanobacteria, toxins, algal blooms, nitrogen, levels of nitrogen in E. coli. There were also other concerns, including sewage spills, industrial and municipal discharges into local rivers, the negative impacts of land use, so farming, forestry, urban settlement, industry, stormwater management, and wastewater management, as well as a concern with the overuse of the water resource. Questions were asked about, what freshwater state communities would like to achieve, and it was pretty much a reversal of all the concerns that I've just talked about. So things like reducing sediment, reducing E. coli and cyanobacteria levels, aiming for a swimmable state, aiming for a healthy, sustainable ecosystem, drinkable water, restoration of native plants and native species. In terms of what communities were happy about regarding the current state that they wanted to retain, they were generally happy about with the fencing and planting that had been achieved, stock exclusion, waterway access. Participants also mentioned they were happy with the nitrogen controls that are already in place in Taupo to improve water quality. At the next station or bus stop, this was about current actions and action plans. So communities could talk about a number of actions that are already in place, such as these include changes to farming systems, for example, less stock and lower input systems, the fencing and planting that had happened or was occurring, education and involvement. So this came up quite a bit in terms of catchment groups, protection and care groups, involvement in farm planning and greenhouse gas workshops, catchment plans and nutrient budgets, wetland restoration, retiring areas of land, pest management that was happening, and wastewater upgrades. In Taupo, community participants mentioned the current farming restrictions that are already in place in Taupo. Things like intensification restrictions, stock exclusion for waterways, and nitrogen limits, nitrogen allocation using overseer. Limits and rules, another bus stop station where a policy person would be on hand. There were a range of views on who and what activities needed to be regulated to manage fresh water. And these range from those community participants who considered that there's too much restriction to those who focused on particular activities and made suggestions about activity types and management tools, such as the use of farm plans, land use change, discharges to water, fertiliser use, stock exclusion, etc.
Thanks, thanks, Jackie. We do have the report in the agenda, and
okay.
so councillors have been through that. Are there any
I suppose I
quick
just
things
wanted,
you'd like to highlight before we move to any questions from councillors?
probably from the community, that last point was probably one of the challenges, strengths, and how to progress was an important one. So, yeah, there certainly are challenges and there are strengths, but in terms of what to progress, they talked about awareness and education, but more the collaboration and community, connecting with other groups, iwi and agencies, and continuing with that good work. And that also came up with the sector or the stakeholder engagement, is to actually work together with regional and territorial authorities, and a whole lot of working with industry in terms of freshwater management.
Great. Thank you for that. I would like to acknowledge the amount of work that went into organizing and holding all of these engagements, whether they were face-to-face or online. There were a variety of avenues through which people could engage with the process, and just wanted to acknowledge all the hard work that evidently went into that process. We do have a question online from Councillor Husband. Stu?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Jackie, for the report. It was a great attempt at engagement, and hats off to council and yourself for arranging that. However, I only went to a couple of them, and I guess the downside that I have is that I felt the same old squeaky wheels were there, and that I've seen over 9 years, and that's both farmers and environmental groups. I felt not enough emphasis in the report around the pest corridors that have been created by fencing off waterways, and I know we have to. I'm not saying we don't, and I say that's fantastic that it's been done. However, we have created some absolutely brilliant pest corridors, and the koi carp is just an absolute major that for some reason we just sort of flip over and go back to farming as a problem. And that's how the report felt to me, is that it's all about intensification or land use or the good old easy fruit to pull off the tree. Farming sucks, and I felt that's how, I hope you understand what I'm trying to get at, is that's how I felt reading the report, is there's not enough emphasis. The koi carp, there's areas on the Waikato that's been eroded by, we heard a guy yesterday, and not part of region and not a farmer, but heard lost 15 metres off his land. And so I think at some stage our regional council needs to take a lead on this and say, we believe that these fish are doing enormous damage, and not how it's sort of I just felt, I hope you get what I'm meaning, and it's hard online, that we're just brushing over the pest fish and not sort of digging into it a little bit more. I think the government need to know that, and that the pressure needs to be applied back through to government about it. Yeah, just interested in your thoughts.
And Helen might jump on board because I wasn't present at all the workshops, but from the information that I could see, koi carp did come up as an issue alongside other pests, be it weeds, etc. I would say koi carp was an issue, but in terms of all the information, when you bring it together, it wasn't identified as a major issue, is what I'm saying.
I suppose this report.
Yeah,
I concur with that, Jackie.
Yeah, and I
was
guess
surprised
the problem for
actually
me,
that it wasn't raised more often.
Yeah, and that's because the right people weren't in the room. But I guess, Helen, the problem for me is having chaired the integrated catchment for 9 years and standing down this at the end of this month. If our council doesn't know through all of our catchment committees and all of the stuff we do as a council that koi carp is one of the major issues we have in the Waikato, we've got a bit of a listening problem at our council. Forget about going out to the stuff that you guys did, which was fantastic, and it was a great attempt at you can't do any more as a council. You did brilliant, and but my point is, if council are not hearing what the catchment committees have said for 9 years, and that includes iwi, that includes sector groups like Mercury and all the energy companies and DOC and Fish and Game and all that. If we're not hearing that, I think we've got a Tullinga problem. Our ears might be painted on, like I say to my kids. So I'm concerned that I'm stepping out after 9 years and we still have not heard from community, and they can't say it loud enough, that koi carp are the biggest problem, bar none, facing our waterways.
So I suppose, thanks for that, Stu. I suppose that this report is providing feedback on what was heard at these community meetings or through these online forums. I get what you're saying, Stu.
Yeah.
But the thing is this is a report reporting back on what was heard. And what I'm hearing from Jackie is that koi carp was mentioned, and Helen, I'll let you pop in here in a second, that koi carp was mentioned, but this report is providing the balance of the collection of points made.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And I suppose, so then the question is in this freshwater policy review process, where do we take this information from these community engagements and augment it with what we have heard consistently through our ICM meetings and things like that?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, I think it's exactly what you said. This report is based on the feedback we got, and be that what it is. And as Stu said, yes, we would have loved to have had 4 or 5 times the amount of people who turned up, but these are the people who turned up and inputted. This is a component of what is fed into the process. We also feed in those conversations that we're aware of and that information that people have shared with us. Critically, I think we need to be mindful that this might not be the tool to address some issues that people have raised. And with respect to invasive fish species, what we're asked to do under the MPS freshwater management, we will go as far as we can under that to address that, but it does sit outside the scope of this in the majority, and as Councillor Husband has identified, sits actually outside our responsibility as well, because there is that conversation to have with government. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and Madam Chair, if I could just say, please, Helen and Jackie, I am 100% not getting at you guys. It's all the process. I take my hats off. You did a fantastic job at arranging those events. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you understand my frustrations. Thanks.
Yeah, I hear you, Stu. For those of us who have been out there hearing the broken record from landowners, it can be frustrating to see the compilation of this data and not see it register as highly as we would think it would, given the number of times it gets mentioned to some of us. But Helen, did you want to add any comments before we move on?
Just that the next stage also will bring together the threads of the conversations, as Tracy has said, this data from this report, plus also what the State of the Environment report is starting to pull together. So that'll be the next stage, is really teasing into what are we identifying as issues and causes and so on. So more conversations to come in that regard.
Great, thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks, Pamela. I like your report, and thank you for your presentation. And I chose the meeting to go to in Hamilton because I thought I would hear very city-centric view, and I was really pleasantly surprised, actually, what I heard in Hamilton East at that hui. I felt there was an orthodoxy in the room, and I guess while I sympathise with Stu's comment on koi, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the community has spoken, and that's what I like about this analysis. But I have a bit of sympathy with where Stu was going, and I guess I would ask the question, because what I heard in that Hamilton hui, I heard a couple of outlier comments, and I thought, wow, I never thought of that, and I've never heard that raised, and that's a really interesting insight that person brought. So my question, Jackie, and probably Tracy, is how do you deal with those outlier comments that may represent a real pearl, even though they're not being said by a lot of people, the feed, that insight is really, really valuable, because the temptation is to say only one person over all those workshops said it, so it doesn't really matter. But give me some comfort that if there were some pearls, we captured them, please.
I'll respond to that, councillor. So the way that we gathered all the information was we never lost any of the information. So from all those little post-it notes that people put on maps or put on documents, hoping that their information will be captured, it certainly has. We may not understand some of the wording, so we had to kind of guess if people said different places and we didn't know what it was. But in terms of the outliers, the information is stored in our system in such a way that policy can certainly go back to those, to all the community workshops, all the information regarding the online feedback forms, all the written feedback that we received via policy. So as we're looking, well, I can't speak from a policy perspective, but if there are outliers and looking further into the report, because the report is a reflection of what all that information represents. So for more detail, there's certainly, even though it's a very big report, it's over 100 pages, there's certainly more detail within the way we've recorded that information, no matter what, whether it be a workshop, online or written. So it hasn't been lost in terms of whether those outliers were in the report. It's probably another question, given the tight time frame that we had to write the report within a few weeks.
Sorry, Tracy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think the question that you've asked, Councillor McPherson, really speaks to the art of policy. To be fair, it is not an exact science. It is, here is a plethora of information. What I heard from some of the ladies who spoke at Raglan, I thought, we got to bank that. That is pure gold.
Yeah.
But other people may not have picked it up.
Yeah.
But as Jackie said, we've picked up everything. That gets synthesised, and there will be things that come to the top, things that don't come to the top. Those outliers add to the richness of the conversation. It is not a numbers game. I think, it is not only one person said it, so therefore it's not as important as 14 people saying it.
Okay.
It is every comment we get is treated equally, and that is the policy then takes it, synthesises it, and looks at where some of the themes are, or actually has a look at it totally unbiased and says, okay, here's something we need to look into further. So for me, it is synthesising all that information we get and pulling the themes or some of those key pearlers that we need to look into. But it's not an exact science. There is no algorithm that is written that we can throw it all into a machine and it pops it out. Therefore, this is your policy direction. So that is the art of policy once we get all the information in.
So further to that answer, were there examples where your pearls that you wanted to bank, is there any way the public can get a look at those? Like I'm wondering about an appendix to the report that says at the range of views, here's some examples, or does the policy process not work like that? Does it do what you've just described, come up with this document, and that's what it is?
I would suggest what you're looking for would be at a finer grain and would require more resource and analysis than what Jackie has done for us to date.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you an idea. There's 17 spreadsheets with 4 tabs on each one, and you might have 50 lines of data on each tab, times that by 17, and it's quite a lot of data.
And we are just, this is sort of
The
stage
start.
one
Yes.
of this process. And so I think in terms of going out to the public with this, I think that there's further work to do. We're in a position to do that. But I think that what I've heard is acknowledgement that all of that has been captured None of it, no post-it note was lost and is now robustly contained in some Excel spreadsheet somewhere. Councillor Litchmark.
Yeah, mana o te wai. Look, it was really interesting. I attended 5 from a cross section from Taupo, Tikawiti, Kawhia, Whangaroa, Tuakau, and all of those communities had something that was slightly different or one of those pearls. And a bit like Stu Husband, I'm going to do what interests me the most, and that was the coastal communities and their they weren't disconnected by freshwater and saltwater wetlands. They assumed that both were one, and the way that they should be treated was one. And I can't see that actually being, in the report. And I think those are the things that are lost for reasons that don't suit the council. And I think those are gems that need to be incorporated, because that is what the community considers appropriate for this council to be taking into account, and it hasn't.
Oh, it has, though. I heard that all of those have been captured and they have been considered. I've certainly heard no evidence that staff are editing or refusing to incorporate any particular comment that was made.
I guess it's through that. Sorry, I guess I didn't. As talked about, that's granular, and when it comes through the system, whether or not that will actually be part of the bigger picture that we'll be taking into consideration. I heard also that all of those things are captured, but to me, the coastal communities, it was a point that was raised, and I think it needs to be highlighted as being a feature of a coastal community.
Do you want to?
Yeah, Madam Chair, one thing, while it hasn't got raised or sourced by any of the hui that were held in coastal areas, there was a very strong theme that came through with respect to Te Mana o Te Wai requiring a holistic approach from the mountains to the sea, and we heard that at every hui. So it isn't paired back to these specific hui, but that integrated approach to water definitely came through.
Councillor Kneebone.
Thanks. No, thanks, Jackie. Just for a question for you, Tracy, just looking at the process here on exec summary there, you've talked about specific engagements coming up to workshop and Wananga, the various components of the MPSFM. That'll be in the over, because I'm assuming we're doing I know we've been told, could you just refresh me? We're doing some specific stuff with the ag sector and that sort of thing, because I know a lot of them are wanting to know when they're going to be able to get into the engine room and understand what it really means in terms of actions on the ground sort of thing.
Yep. So naturally, as soon as we had these hui, everybody wanted to jump to how do we fix it.
Yeah.
And I think that was really evident, particularly in the Tikawiti hui. Everyone's like, oh, I've got the solution. Thankfully, the MPS asked us to step through some processes. So the engagement, the next step of the engagement that we're going through is the iwi engagement up till the end of the year. And then also the formation of our community reference group. So we talked about that at a previous workshop. We're just about to go out for expressions of interest for those groups. So having those conversations, as Jackie highlighted in her opening, it is likely autumn next year. So we will be going out and talking about, okay, here are the nuts and bolts, here are how this clicks together, here are some of the options for the policy and the framework of response. So it's really going to take us that time. In the interim, we have some sectors who are pretty keen to know what's going on, and so we've said, look, invite us into your forum rather than us create one, and we will turn up and we will work with you, and we'll keep you appraised of where we're at.
Cool.
we don't have an extensive sector engagement program. We just don't have the hands to do that, but we have given undertakings that if anybody wants an update along the way, we'll talk to them. If we have substantive science that comes out, similarly, we will go out and talk to sectors about that, but we don't have the program, or we aren't as close to the sectors as we were with Plan Change 1. It's quite a different process.
Yeah, but equally, I think some of the stuff that's come out of the freshwater reform package is actually quite directive as well, and so we don't have the flexibility that we had either. So I think the opportunity is going to be finding where are those opportunities within those directives to bespoke solutions,
Yes.
you know.
And we do have some sector engagement programmed in for next year that will be specifically targeted to the sectors.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Sorry, coming back to you, Stu, online.
Yeah, sorry, just one more quick question of Trace. How come you didn't use the catchment and drainage committees to go to?
So through you, Madam Chair, we did the...
Was that because they give you the koi carp answer?
No, not at all. We focused on making sure that we had community engagements on each of the freshwater management units, and we also connected with our integrated catchment directorate and made them very aware of when those engagements were to be held in those freshwater management units so they could go out to their networks.
You know, I'm just curious as to why we already had those committees in place, why we didn't take advantage of that to get straight into the inner workings of rural land ownership. Cheers.
Thanks for that, Stu. All right, we've got we're just receiving this report. We've got a mover in Councillor McPherson. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second. Oh, sorry, did you get in there? Oh, God, you were so subtle with your motion there, Dennis. I didn't pick. Yeah. Good stuff. We've got a seconder in Councillor Tegg. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, Jackie, and thank you, Helen, for joining us online as well. Okay, now we're moving on to item 8. This is page 197. This is our tried and true submission summary report. Miffy for a final time.
Yes. Kia ora tātou. So I will give you the normal update. And then
Very,
we have,
very quick.
yes, and then we've got a little treat for you. We have a,
Yeah.
yep, which Tracy's going to run through, I think.
We'll do that after you give us your quick
Yes,
update and we
yep,
receive your reports.
And of course, my page has taken a while to load. So since we wrote the report, Hamilton City have notified their intensification plan change as required by the MPS for urban development. We'd already received YPARs just as I was writing the report, so we're preparing submissions on those. Waikato District has chosen to defer the notification of theirs to do additional work. They weren't quite happy with where they were at, so they did not meet the 20th of August deadline, but we are expecting that to be coming soon. Thames Coromandel District Council has released a safer speed limit speed management plan for us, which we're having a look at, and MPI are doing consultation on the forestry and wood processing industry transformation plan, so we are looking at that one and potentially doing a submission. The MPS on highly productive land, we were expecting that by Friday. We still haven't seen it, but we do expect it any day. And we are obviously still expecting the RM reform exposure drafts of the Natural and Built Environment Act and Spatial Planning Act sometime in October, and the future for local government review at the end of October.
Madam Chair, if I can just identify, as Miffy said, we'll have those substantive bills in October around Natural and Built Environment and Strategic Planning Act. The sector fired a bit of a salvo at the Minister, saying you're giving us these substantive acts probably 2 weeks after a new council's formed. We don't think that's particularly fair because there was an indication that we'd only have a month for comments. We understand the comment period will finish at the end of February. So that'll be something that our new council have to try and get their heads around. As Miffy said, we do have a bit of a treat for you, Cue slideshow, Dave. Did want to just highlight for the committee your work program over the last triennium. This slide here is an indication of meetings we've had, submission subcommittee meetings we've had, and number of workshops we've had. It has not been inconsequential. It has been quite substantive. Just a reminder of some of the key projects that the Strategy and Policy Committee has had oversight of, and I acknowledge this is oversight. Not everybody has sat through all these processes. Commonly we get caught up with the work of the moment and we forget what we've actually achieved over the last 3 years. We've also had 2 appearances by the chair in front of the Environment Select Committee. So usually we average about 1 every 5 years. We've had 2 just in this last triennium. Next slide, Dave. This really shows you the work of Miffy and Miffy's team in terms of submissions. Before Councillor McPherson says your numbers don't add up, there are and others. So there are central and taking a random stab. So there are central government submissions and district plan submissions, and there's a bunch of other submissions. So that's why, if you have a look at that graph down the bottom, that's pretty telling in terms of the work of this committee and to support this committee. The next slide, please, Dave. This just gives you an indication of those by topic in the 2022 year. So you'll see biodiversity, climate, and water lead the charge, which is no great surprise when you think of the work we do, those 3 being intricately linked. Unfortunately, these are all separate submission processes, so to get that integration is a bit of a challenge. And the final slide, Dave. So this says, well, who's had the most love from us, from Miffy's team, in terms of our territorial authority? So this is just the snapshot of this year. It doesn't include Waikato District Council's district plan and the small matter of Ahinawai, which took up a considerable portion of last year. What I did just want to show you is commonly we get caught up with what's on the agenda of the day, but when you look back over the 3 years, you realise we've achieved an awful lot. And in terms of the submission summary, it's a lion's share of the work of this committee on behalf of the region and Miffy's team, making sure that it is an organisation approach, not just a policy or science lens. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that. I think you're right that sometimes we can get caught up in the day-to-day and what's happened this month or what's happened over the last 6 months, and it can be easy to forget the cumulative effect of all of the work that the committee has put into it. And I suppose from my point of view as the chair, I would like to thank the committee members. It takes a lot of effort and commitment when you look at over 80 meetings, 80 meetings for this committee, whether that was Strategy and Policy Committee, Submissions Subcommittee, or the workshops. That is a lot of meetings to get through, a lot of reading, and a lot of material to absorb and engage with, and I just want to commend the committee members for their willingness to do that. I would also like to acknowledge and thank Democracy Services, James and Dave here in the room, but obviously through the triennium we've had others who have joined us. But I appreciate your willingness to engage with often temperamental technology and to persevere and to put the effort into recording the conversations and the decisions we make as a committee. I also would like to acknowledge that when all of the workload comes to this committee, there is a tremendous amount of work and effort and expertise and commitment that comes from each and every member of our staff. And I wish we could thank them all, but I think we'd be here another hour if we tried to list all the the wonderful staff members and consultants that we have had the privilege to have heard reports from and receive insights from. So I would like to acknowledge the staff and consultants as well. And finally, I would like to thank you, Tracy. I know that when we first started working together, we didn't know each other from anything, and there's always that moment of challenge and how do we find a way to productively work together. And I just wanted to acknowledge the collaborative nature with which you approach your interactions with, well, particularly me as the chair, but also all of council, and just would like to say that I hope this region recognizes the skill, the tremendous expertise, and the commitment you bring to building a better Waikato, you yourself, along with the staff associated with you. So thank you for that. All right, Stu.
I just, look, I endorse everything that the chair said. I'm always amazed, Tracy, how much detail you seem to be over, given the complex stuff that all your team deal with. So well done. Hey, can we have a copy of that little slide you just gave us, please? Yeah, that was all. Yeah.
All right. So with that, thank you, Miffy, for your final submissions summary for us. Let's see. We do need to have we've got Councillor Nickel move, and was that Councillor? Sorry, I heard peripheral hearing, but then I got the peripheral sight over here. See, I'm trying. All right, we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Fantastic. Now we need to move. Oh, and yes.
Yeah.
Councillor Nicole, moving, Councillor White, second to move into public excluded section of our meeting. Sorry, we just need. Oh, the record.